And today we're going to talk about elections. Elections are 3 weeks from today. The fourth round of elections, 3 weeks from today. Muki's going to explain to us how we got here. Oh, got to let the boss in. Scott is joining us. There he is. And so I will let Muki get started, and we're a small group, so we will be able to unmute and chat and ask questions at the end, but Muki has a presentation for us to lay the groundwork. Thank you once again, Muki, for staying up late for us, and take it away.
Great. So it's a pleasure to be with you. And can you see the screen? Just give me a thumbs up. Yeah, good. Okay. So making sense of Israeli politics, we're going to do two things this morning for you. First part is to talk about our system. You're a democracy, we're a democracy. There are two democracies that are as different one from another as almost possible. Because of our system, we have the potential of having lots of elections. And we'll be talking about those elections, the upcoming election in the second part of the conversation today. So the building you see is our parliament building, is the Knesset building in Jerusalem. And the Knesset has 120 members. It has had that number of members since the start of the state. So each representative has represented a gradually growing number of people. We have one house. We don't have a bicameral system like you do. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look at your system. The rest of the world has spent quite some time in the last couple of months learning lots more about your system in the period from the election until the inauguration of the president. Even within that, there were milestones in that process that were clear-cut milestones when things needed to be done by. In our system, it's very, very different. So let's start. You have a presidential system. We have a parliamentary system. The top person in your system is the president. The top person in our system is the prime minister. This puts us with the majority of democracies. Most democracies have a prime minister as the head of government and not a president as the head of government. We have a president, by the way. Our president is a figurehead, kind of like the Queen of England. Our president has one important role in elections, but it's not a politically powerful role. Our president receives ambassadors. Our president does a lot of symbolic actions. The power rests in the hand of the prime minister. In presidential systems, you vote directly for the president. In parliamentary systems where a prime minister is the head, the leader of the biggest party, or the leader of the party that the other parties agree should be prime minister, becomes prime minister. So on your ballot, you have the name of the president, or you have the name of people contesting the election to be president. We don't have a name of a person on our ballot. We have the names of the parties, and the leader of the party that wins the election becomes the prime minister, like the British system that way. The next thing is, we know when your next election is. You can open up a calendar. November 2024, 5th of November, as it happens, is your next election. Those of you that came on at the beginning of the conversation heard Debbie and I talking about the fact that she thought she might have been able to come to Israel to vote in our election. And I said, well, don't worry, there'll be another one soon. We have maximum terms, not fixed terms. In other words, 4 years after the government is formed in this next election, we need to have another election. We are obliged to have another election. At any moment until that time, we could also end up having an election. So we don't know when our election is, when the one after this one is, and we don't know also when the government will be formed even after the election. So you have very clear days when things have to happen. You know when the president's going to be inaugurated. You know when the president's when the results have to be authorized. There are all these points on your calendar. You know them for the 24 election and for the 28 election and for the 32 election, and we could go on. We don't have it in that system. Perhaps the biggest difference is the actual system itself. You have districts. We have proportional representation. So you have districts in which there are either 2 candidates or 3 candidates or even more candidates. For example, I learned the system in Georgia. But in the end, the person who gets the most votes becomes the representative of that county or that state, that caucus, that vote. So if there were to be a situation in which there are 1 million voters in a particular area, 500,001 people vote for the one candidate, and 499,999 people vote for the other candidate, the winner is the candidate who got more votes. I understand with your presidential system, there's a complication in that, in each particular, in terms of the way the votes are counted nationally, but in each particular state, in each particular county or district, election district, there is direct representation and there is a name on the ballot. Our system is proportional representation. This means that every single party needs to provide to the Central Elections Committee a list of names, 120 names, numbered from 1 to 120. And then if they get 10% of the vote nationally, the first 12 names on their list of 120, 10% of their names get into the Knesset. This means you could live in a district where nobody else votes your ideology. Now, you could be a Democrat in Wyoming. Your vote gets counted into the total votes that the Democrats get. The advantage of the system is that it's very democratic. The disadvantage of the system is that we have struggled to, not always, but we have struggled to have an outcome. And I'll get into that in a moment. So, proportional representation, we all vote around the country. We don't vote for a person like you do, because you could theoretically, in your state, say, well, I'm really a Democrat at heart. I really like, and I know the Republican candidate in my district, and I'm going to vote for them on a local level because I think they're going to be good for my district. Because you have a personality on the list. We have a list of names with an ideology and a platform. If the polls tell me that Party X is going to get 20% in the election, 24 seats, the person that I really like is number 29, you're not going to get in. I'm not voting for a person. The person from my district is number 29, I'm not going to get in. Similarly, the people at the top of the list are guaranteed to get into parliament if their party is polling above the threshold, whereas the lower down you are on the list, harder it is. So primaries in Israel are about those parties that have primaries, and there's no law that requires us to have primaries. Each party decides how they make up their list of 120 names however they wish. They can have primaries. They can have, in the Orthodox parties, it's the rabbi, the head rabbi or the committee of rabbis that makes up the list. It can be can be the head of the party that makes up the list. It can even be 2 or 3 smaller parties that are worried that they will not get 3.25% of the vote, which is the threshold to get into the Knesset. And so 3 parties or 4 parties can band together and come up with an agreement that place 1 goes to party A and place 2 and 3 go to party B and place so on. Whatever they make up the list doesn't matter. Now, you also face in the United States a concept called a by-election. Because a candidate dies or retires or becomes appointed to a government position after the election, and because people voted for a candidate personality, that personality needs to be replaced by another personality. In our system, if numbers 1 through 24 got into the Knesset, number 11 dies, number 25 everyone moves up 1, and number 25 moves into the Knesset. So until our next election, the old list stands. And we had a whole lot of people resign from the Knesset in the last few months, and new people who came in placed them based on the list that they were on prior to the election. Now, since we don't have names on the ballots, what do we have on the ballot? We have 1, 2, or 3 Hebrew letters and the name of the party also on a slip of paper. What you do on election day, and by the way, we have no absentee ballots, we have no proxy ballots. The only people who don't vote in the polling station in their district on election day are embassy staff and sailors and soldiers. They still vote in the same manner. In other words, a polling station with all of this information is brought to them wherever they happen to be. I go in, my identity card is checked, it's crossed off, and I go behind a curtain. I take one of these pieces of paper and put it in my envelope. Now, what's missing from this collection is a blank sheet of paper, because there's also a blank sheet of paper and a pencil in case your party has run out. So many people have voted for it, or because someone else sabotaged it. So you can actually write your party on the piece of paper as well. You can see that in this particular election, there were 25 parties that were running. Only 10, 9, 12 get into parliament. So that is how the actual election works. There's an additional complication. When it's first past the post, your system, I got more votes than you, I'm the representative. What do we do in a situation where, in order to be elected, theoretically, let's say you need to get 100,000 votes. You got 550,000 votes. You got 5 candidates in, and you've got an extra 50,000 votes that went to you. What do they belong to? Who do they belong to? So 2 parties, any 2 parties prior to the election can sign a vote sharing agreement. I got 50,000 extra votes. The party that I signed the agreement with got 60,000 extra votes. My 50 and their 60 gives them an extra seat. Had I got the 60,000 and they got the 50,000, I would have got the extra seat. So these are public. We know in advance. Maybe it'll be enough to dissuade someone from voting for a party. But people make, it's normally within the same ideological family of parties, an effort to make sure that no votes are wasted. So this is actually the easier part of the system. This is how we vote. As I said, you can see an example of the envelope that this piece of paper needs to be placed into. This is someone's on the 21st election. So I think 2 elections ago, are we 22nd now? placing their vote in the ballot. That's the simple part. What happens next is, this is a page with lots of noise on it, lots of details, and I'm not going to really pay much attention to all of the laws of what happens beforehand, rather on election day. On election day at 10 p.m., we have exit polls. And through the night, they count, and we start getting real results. And the real results are meshed with the exit polls, gradually getting a picture, much as you guys were getting pictures in your elections. The difference is that it's very difficult to call the election. You know that certain states were being called. It's very different to call the election because in order to be able to form a government, you need 61 seats. No one has ever got more than the mid-50s, and this was in the early Ben Gurion years, which means every single government that we have is a coalition. And although there are obvious parties in coalitions that may belong together, there are often surprises, and there are parties that go and run with other parties. So we have to wait until the soldiers' votes are counted, until in the last election, we had corona votes, COVID votes, people that had to vote in special polling stations that weren't in their district are counted. And once the official results are in and we know how many seats each of the parties that got into the Knesset received, the president, remember I said we have a president who doesn't have much of a role, the president meets with the leaders of each of the parties that were elected to the Knesset and asks them who they think should form the government. Now, this is the time where they no longer say me, 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 which is what they were saying before the election. They now look around realistically to who is ideologically similar to them, can make a government. And the president writes the numbers down, and he sees that 65 people recommended person A and 55 people recommended person B. So he then gives the party, the head of the party that everyone thinks is most likely to make government, 28 days to form a government. Okay, so you understand, we've had elections. It's 8 days afterwards, we have the official results. It takes the president 2 or 3 days of consultation until he knows who to give the job of forming a government. Then that person has 28 days to form a government. Now, the party that they've got the vote sharing with, that's normally a no-brainer. They're going to join into the coalition. And there are certain natural groupings that fit together. But if there is the challenge of getting 61, the parties that join, remember, they ran against the government in the election. Ran against the party of the person who's making the government. And so they come and say, I want certain policy positions and I want certain power positions. I want to be the Minister of Education because I want religious education in this country. And if I'm Minister of Education, I'm more able to propose that. Or I want to be the Minister of Justice because I'm under investigation and I want to see what I can do to prevent my investigation being carried on. So this trading between the parties, government has 28 days in order to reach, rather, the person in this position has 28 days in order to form a government. If they are unable to do it in 28 days, they can request a 14-day extension. Even in situations where there was a 63 or 65 or 68 seats that seemed like a natural fit, it normally takes to day 12 for the extension to get a government, because people are playing hardball in terms of the budgets that they're going to create, in terms of which ministries they will have, and in terms of which issues they want the government to have on their government platform. If after 14-day extension, no one is able to form a government, someone else is given another 28 days, which they have the opportunity to try and piece together a government. And if that fails, the Knesset has another 28 days in order to form a government. That's what happened for the first time in our last election results, that it just dragged on and on and on and on because no one was really able to form government. Now, these are the final results from 2015. It doesn't really matter. I could just find a nice graphic that I wanted to share. And so we can see that the two biggest parties who ran against each other together didn't have 61. So when we look at Likud, and Netanyahu becomes the prime minister after this election, he was not a majority in the Knesset. He was not even a majority in his government, because his government had 66 seats and he had the loyalty of only 30, which is why it takes so much negotiating to create a coalition. It also explains why you can hear Israel's Minister of Defense or Israel's Minister of Justice or some or other high-ranking Israeli government minister making a statement which is not the statement that the prime minister had made a few hours before or a few hours later, because they represent different parties. Here we can see again the last three elections. April the 9th, 2019, September the 17th, 2019, and the 2nd of March, 2020. At least three of the people in this session got to vote in that election. And we can see that in all three of those elections, nobody more than 60. You need 61 to be a government. So in April, it was 60-55. In September, it was 55-57. And in March, it was 58-55. And there is a party, Israel Beiteinu. I'm going to go through the parties and talk about the elections, the upcoming elections in a moment. Israel Beiteinu, in all three situations, said, I will sit in a national unity government. I will not sit in a minority government. And the first twice they were unable to form a government, so we had a second set of elections, and the third time we went into our national unity government. So that explains, not always. We've had situations where there have been coalitions, and the coalitions have lasted for all 4 years of the election. In fact, if you don't include the 4 elections we've had in the last 2 years, but rather you look at the period before that, we had 20 elections in 70 years. We should have had 20 elections in 80 years. So it's not that, it's not that unstable when we look at the big picture. But we have instability at the moment, and we will try and understand why in 1 second. So your president has just finished appointing secretaries. Now, the wording, and I wanted to check up the wording and I didn't get to check up the wording, but the wording, as much as I remember it, is acting at the will of the president. Secretaries acting at the will of the president. Now, the president looks for people that he could work with, that are ideologically in a similar position, that are competent, and puts those people, and those people go through a process of being vetted, and those people become secretaries. And the president can at any moment fire the secretaries and replace the secretaries with someone else. This is a picture also of a government 2 or 3 governments ago. We see Netanyahu in the front, and we see next to him Ruby Rivlin, the president. This is as the government has come to be sworn in. And this is a government that is made up of 6 or 7 different parties who are loyal to the prime minister, but only up to a point. But more than that, they can fire him. Unlike your system. In other words, if there are 65 people in the coalition and a small party with 7 seats decides to leave the coalition because they don't get their way over one of their core issues, we are down to a government of 58. And if the prime minister cannot find 3 more people to take him to 61, we go to elections again. That's why we know the maximum term, but we don't know exactly when the next elections are. By the way, that's the system in Britain. When Cameron said, we're going to have a referendum, expecting to win the referendum, he lost the referendum, he resigned. He didn't lose the majority, but he resigned because he felt he'd lost his possibility to rule. Our prime minister can call an election at any time up to the maximum date, feeling like they can do better if they have an election, but they can also be forced into an election because they lose the majority, because they lose the vote of confidence. This gives the small parties power. It doesn't give them unlimited power because, well, it normally doesn't give them unlimited power, but I'm going to say what most commentators are saying at the moment. When you have a prime minister who is charged and in court and is therefore more easily able to be manipulated, so you have more instability. And most assessments are that it's not the system that has led to the instability that we're experiencing at the moment, rather it's the personalities and the circumstances. And the funny thing is, I've been reading some of that about your system in the last little while as well. Notice the problem is not necessarily with the system, the problem is with the personalities, and we'll understand why that is, why commentators think that as we go forward. But at the end of the last election, a national unity government was created between Benjamin Netanyahu and Benjamin Gantz, leaders of the 2 biggest parties at the time, together with a slew of other parties that also joined the parliament. They arranged to have a 36-month term, 18 months each, with Netanyahu being the first and Gantz being the second. They had an equal number of ministers. And it was supposed to be an emergency government to cope with the COVID crisis. That was the situation that we had. But, and again, people say that Gantz who was the chief of staff and is a very honest man, was not a very political man. If a budget is not passed, it's tantamount to the government losing their majority, and we are obliged to go to elections. And when Netanyahu felt the noose was tightening and he didn't want to stay in government, his own party didn't vote against the budget that they had brought to the Knesset. And as a result, we've gone to elections. So who is who in these elections? I'm going to try and go through these quickly so that there'll be time for a sort of 15 minutes for questions at the end. So who is the biggest party, according to the polls, continues to be the Likud. They're dropping in the polls down to the lowest they've been in any of the 4 elections that we've seen, currently polling on 28. And And the criminal case that will begin after the elections against Netanyahu in 3 different cases, in bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, have taken a number of people away from his party. His hardcore seem to be sticking with him through thick and thin, although there are outlier polls at the moment that suggest he could lose another 2 or 3 seats. And before the election, there are also polls that suggest he could pick up 2 or 3 seats. So it's not going to be a dramatic change from being a minority, even in the coalition, were he to be prime minister. Next party is Yesh Atid. Yesh Atid was part of blue and white in the last election. Benny Gantz became the leader. The man in black is a man called Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid's father was a member of parliament. He himself was a journalist, apparently a heartthrob in his younger days, as so was Netanyahu, apparently. He's pictured here with Elazar Stern, who was an officer in the army and later on was the chief education officer in the army, who's also a member of his party. Stern is religious, and it's an interesting picture because Yesh Atid waves the banner of religious freedom. The religious right say he's anti-religious. He would argue that he's in favor of religious freedom. He was at a number of elections ago, not the 3 we saw, but the one before, the 2015 election, he was Minister of Finance in Netanyahu's government, and he left government in the middle. He was fired, so to speak, by Netanyahu. There's no love lost between them, and currently his party is running on 19 seats. The next party is probably the most interesting development of this election. You can see 2 people. One in the white shirt is Gidon Sa'ar, and the one next to him is Zev Elkin. Gidon Sa'ar and Zev Elkin are lifelong Likud members. Gidon Sa'ar and Zev Elkin were members of the cabinet until a few months ago. Gidon Sa'ar and Zev Elkin are politically to the right of Netanyahu. They're members of the Likud, but they're more hardline than Netanyahu. And they say we cannot any longer, in good conscience, be members of a party in which decisions are being made based on political and personal considerations and not based on best interests of the country. They claim that the trial is getting in the way and that the prime minister should have suspended himself a while ago. And he's doing whatever possible to not, he'll make any deal possible so that he doesn't have to go to court, and instead of doing the best interest of the country. What's particularly interesting is that they're both very high profile Likudnikim. Zev Elkin is a world-class chess player, and he is said to be the guy that reads the political, how things are going to play out politically way before the elections. When he jumped ship, it was a big shock. When Gidon Sa'ar, who had been chafing, under Netanyahu's very long rule, people maybe thought it was personality in it. When Elkin broke, it was a lot more of a shock. What's also interesting is they cannot be dismissed with the favorite slur of the Netanyahu government, which is leftists. They and their party are not leftists. Not in their voting history, not in their platform, not in who they are, and they say they will not sit with Netanyahu. That is 13 seats, according to the current poll, of right-wing voters or center right-wing voters who will not be in the government not in a coalition with the Likud. The next 2 people that you can see are Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked. Both had been in the Likud, both had relations with Netanyahu. Both of them, like many competent people who worked with him, found themselves on the wrong side of him, or some say on the wrong side of his wife, and they left the party. Bennett is a religious self-made high-tech entrepreneur with a lot of money. Shaked is secular lawyer. They have been in the National Religious Party. They've been through a series of different parties. They formed a party called Yamina, which means to the right. And they are, again, cannot be dismissed as another leftist party. They are to the right of Netanyahu on most things, and also even to the right of Netanyahu on judicial reform. And they are polling 11 seats at the moment. Next person that you can see is Ayman Udeh. Ayman Udeh is the head of the United Arab List. United Arab List used to be 4 different Arab parties that had very, very different ideologies. All of them running very close to the 3.25% threshold. And so the United Arab List joined the 4 parties together in a clear-cut document that says, you know, number 1 belongs to this party and number 2 belongs to that party, and so on, like the model I suggested before. They got as many as 15 seats in one of the previous rounds. But leading up to this election, one of the groups, Mansour Abbas, who leads a party called Ra'am, Muslim Islamist party, broke off the United List, and he's currently polling at less than 3.25%, just less, unlikely to cross the threshold. And what did he leave? What did the Islamist party leave the coalition over? He promised that Netanyahu made him. Netanyahu has made promises to all of those politicians that we saw so far and burnt them all. He's run out of Jews to make promises to, and he made a promise to Abbas. Again, when I said that his core will go through, nothing he can do will dissuade them from voting for him. This is the Netanyahu ran on a distinctly anti-Arab platform only 3 elections ago, and now he's courting Mansour Abbas. I don't think, you know, there are those who say that if Abbas gets through, he would join Netanyahu's coalition. At this stage, I don't see him getting through, and I find it hard that who else would be in that coalition. Stranger things have happened. Next 2 parties, obvious, the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties. The one at the top are the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party called the UTJ, United Torah Judaism. That is Litzman. He was our rather disastrous Minister of Health. We spoke about him already. And the other person is Aryeh Deri. He is the leader of the Sephardi religious party. He has actually spent 3 years in jail for, would you believe, bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. United Torah Judaism is expected to get 7. Shas is expected to get 8. They have, for the last period of time, thrown their lot in with the Likud and with Netanyahu. Doing the parties in declining order of size, not necessarily in affiliation. The guy at the top that you can see is Avigdor Lieberman. Avigdor Lieberman, an immigrant from the former Soviet Union. He actually worked as a younger man as a nightclub bouncer. He has an academic degree, but he's a tough guy. He was, he worked for Netanyahu and was a member of the Likud, and also at a certain point felt that he couldn't be there any longer. This was over ideological issues, not over personality issues, although there are strong personality disagreements between him and Netanyahu as well. He couldn't tolerate the kowtowing to the ultra-Orthodox parties, and said he wants a coalition, a national unity coalition without the ultra-Orthodox parties. Netanyahu thought he could persuade him by offering him all sorts of jobs, and he refused to join them. And in the last 3 elections, as we saw, he was the reason that there was no majority government, and he's polling about 7 for the next election. The woman at the bottom is Merav Michaeli. Merav Michaeli is the new leader of the Labour Party. Labour Party down to 6 in the polls, which is actually an improvement on where it was polling in the last few elections. So Labour Party collapsed. And the new parties without a strong history, like Yesh Atid or Blue and White, these new parties emerged in the vacuum created by Labour, but she has come back, and 6 is not a big party, but has started a rebuilding of the party, and we'll see what will happen. The next 2 people, each polling on 4 seats, are Benny Gantz. Remember, Blue and White, they were up there in the high 20s in the last election. He ran on a platform of not joining with Netanyahu, and then made the national unity government. He claimed because of the national emergency, and his inexperience was played by Netanyahu. People feel that he's sold out, and most of his followers have left to other parties. He's polling on 4 seats, which is a dramatic fall. There were even some polls that gave him not passing the 3.25%. Next guy is Nitzan Horowitz from Meretz. Meretz is the left pluralist party, both left on economic issues. Nitzan Horowitz, the head of the party, is a gay man, on gay rights, on separation of religion and state. And they're polling on 4 seats. The last party is religious Zionists. Now, the religious Zionists have run in the past, and for many years were a staple of the Knesset. After Lee Bennett broke off from them, and Yamina has grown much stronger. 2 personalities. The man with the beard is Bezalel Smotrich, a religious right-winger who was a very good minister of transport when his party was in a previous coalition. And he was forced, because it didn't look like he was going to cross the 3.25%, forced by Netanyahu as well to bring in the other man that you see, who is Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir has run many, many times in other parties, in other elections, in a harnessed party, in a radical right-wing party, in a party that when Menachem Begin or Yitzhak Shamir, when Hana was actually in the Knesset, they would walk out whenever he spoke. They would not stay in the Knesset when he spoke. Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir. This is a man seen by many to be beyond the pale, with a very hardcore of racist followers. And I think I've been objective about everyone else, including Bezalel Smotrich. I think I'm being objective about him as well. Some of the things on his platform to expel the Arabs, not just the ones from the West Bank, but the Arab citizens of the state of Israel, to ban homosexuality and to punish homosexuality by death, and to bring in all kinds of religious laws, not by death, to punish homosexuality by prison sentences, and to bring in all kinds of religious laws. So those are the personalities. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will be happy 2 minutes later than I said I would. And I'd be happy now to take any questions. We're a small enough group that people can unmute if they want to ask me a question, and or type it in the chat. I don't know if there were questions in the chat. Couldn't see while I was teaching.
I have a question.
Sure. That's Beverly talking.
This is Beverly talking.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for that information. How do you anticipate was it yesterday's Supreme Court decision about recognizing reform and conservative conversions for immigration? How do you anticipate they're potentially affecting the election?
So I think it's going to affect the election in terms of the propaganda or the advertising that parties will do in the election. I don't think it's going to affect the outcomes of the election. The ultra-Orthodox parties, predictably, it's a travesty. They're redefining Judaism, splitting the nation. That's been their response, and I'm pretty sure that Itamar Ben-Gvir will have very similar things to say. The Labour Party, by the way, number 4 on the platform of the Labour Party is a Reform rabbi. So they have embraced religious pluralism already. Meretz has embraced pluralism. Yesh Atid has run on pluralism as well. So the question is not so much, I think, in the election. The question is what happens if Netanyahu, man desperate to avoid going to jail, has to make a coalition with the ultra-Orthodox parties after the election, and they know that he's desperate to not go to jail, and as they have done the last 3 elections, they up the ante. They demand a law fining. Now, by the way, the Supreme Court was remiss. The Supreme Court has waited since 2005 and 3 times said to the government, pass a law. When the government didn't pass a law, because the government knows that if they pass a law in favor of the ultra-Orthodox, they're going to antagonize many of the secular and so I don't think it's actually going to make a difference in the election outcomes, but it could make a difference in the government that will come afterwards. Now, just some interesting anecdotes. Israel, like many first world countries, has a large and growing population of foreign workers, particularly Filipinos. Overwhelmingly, the population of foreign domestics, female. More and more of them are marrying Israeli men. So this is not, the issue of a conversion is not issue for the occasional American who makes Aliyah. We all know people in that category. My wife's first cousin's wife, father, so not someone I know well, but someone we do for holidays with, married the Philippine carer that worked for him, that cared for his late wife before she died. So ordinary Israelis, so it's not something that can be just dismissed, and more Israelis are looking at other are looking at this Supreme Court decision as acceptable, even within the modern Orthodox community. There are many people, many voices. One of the most prominent modern Orthodox rabbis, Rabbi Benny Lau, came out with a very strong statement today saying, people are banging down the doors to become Jewish. These people want to become Jewish. They're not going to be marrying your children in the Orthodox synagogue anyway, so don't worry about it. Let them be Jews the way they want to be Jews. I don't think it's going to change, as I said at the beginning, the actual election outcomes in any way.
Thank you.
Dina, yes, I see Dina's hand up. Mute yourself. Beverly, mute yourself. Dina, you need to unmute yourself at the bottom of your screen.
Dina, do you know how to unmute? Dina, if you can't unmute, you can type your question into the chat.
No, we can't hear you. So
let's move on to Jay, and maybe Dina
And then
in the
we'll come
meantime
back
will
to
figure
Dina.
out how to unmute herself, and she can go after Jay.
Yeah, hi,
Okay.
Muki. Thanks for the all that explanation, but it certainly looks like you're heading to a 5th election after this one. Is there any chance at all that there's some changes that it will affect the way elections are run in Israel, so that you can either go back to direct elections of the prime minister or change the number of parties? Because Israel looks like a center-right country based on what you're explaining, but this process that they're in will never lead to anything, in my mind, that'll create a coalition that will work.
So I will confess at the outset that I'm in favor of our system, and I think it's the best system we have for our particular context. I think there are three reasons that that we're failing at the moment, and those three reasons are bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. In other words, this is a center-right country, and a Likud government, Likud party without Netanyahu, and Yesh Atid, which is center-left but very center, and the new party, Gidon Saar's party, that Hatikva Chadasha. Between the three of them, you could have a very big and solid government. There are people that are not. Most of the parties are made up of people that don't want to sit with Netanyahu because he has some of them because they fell out with him or they fell out with his wife, and a lot of them that fell out with him now because they felt that he has prioritized keeping out of jail over the best policy for handling Corona. We'll go back to when I spoke about the ultra-Orthodox widespread disparity between how rules were enforced in secular areas and in ultra-Orthodox areas. So if Netanyahu makes a government, it's going to be because he managed to get 61. At the moment, polls suggest that he's not going to get 61. I think you're right, we will have a fifth election, but I think that the fifth election, we are hearing voices. Again, it's difficult to know before the election because we have to see what the actual numbers will be. We are hearing voices saying we will be, from the right and the Arabs saying we will sit together in a 6-month government to get rid of corrupt prime minister, then we'll go to another set of elections, in which he is no longer a candidate. Now, I don't know how much this is wishful thinking. We're hearing strange things being mooted. What kind of conversations are going on in the background, I don't know. If Netanyahu can get to 61 with his natural partners, religious Zionists, two ultra-Orthodox parties, maybe Yamina, although I find it hard that Yamina would fall for the same thing that Gantz fell for, then we would have, we could have a government that would last for longer, but I don't think it would last for very long either because it will be very unstable, held together, and his case is going to go on. At a certain point, he could be convicted. So I don't want a situation where we have two parties and the party is determined, the candidates are determined by the radical voices in those parties, kind of like what, at least some of what I saw happening in some of the Republican Party in America, or some of the, to a less I was aware of in the Democratic Party, but it might be happening as well, that I want the people with radical ideas to have their own radical party. Let them be the religious Zionists or Yamina, let them have their party merits, let them have their party, let the bulk of people, and let the ultra-Orthodox have a party that reflects them. We've had coalitions without the ultra-Orthodox. It's quite possible that we could have a coalition without ultra-Orthodox in the future as well. So talk to me on the 24th of March and we'll see what's going on.
So
Yes.
just to put a slightly sharper point on that, I realize I'm asking you your opinion. Do you think that the major issue of this election is anybody but Netanyahu, as opposed to ideological questions about sovereignty in the West Bank or religious education? Is that, have we come down to yes Netanyahu or no Netanyahu?
Well, there are There is a party, Hatikva Chadasha, with 13 seats, more than 10% of. Dina, I can see you next. I can see you
Okay,
unmuted as well.
thank you
Be
very
next.
much.
I can see there's a party that 13 seats. That's more than 10% of the electorate that are Likud voters are not voting for, and their party has been explicit that they will not sit with Netanyahu. They've even said we will sit with the Likud without Netanyahu. So I think that it's come to a head. Now, I don't want to I want to wish him well, let him go to court, defend himself, and if he's found innocent, well and good. But right now, there are people who were, it's no longer left and right. There isn't a viable left. As you said, Jay, there's no viable, certainly in any next couple of years, I don't see a left-wing government emerging. There could be a right, center-right government that would emerge. It's a government. So I think you're right, Debbie, that the issue Netanyahu has become the very, very divisive, even in people who vote for the right. And he's lost his additional opportunity of saying, they're leftists because people now running against him are not leftists. Dina, please, your question.
So sorry, I wasn't prepared. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry about that. I couldn't see where the mute button was. I'm having issues with my eyes. I don't know. I wanted to ask you, this is about the vaccine. I hope you don't mind if I change the subject. Is that okay with you?
Well, it's almost our time anyway, so I'm okay with that, if that's okay, Debbie.
Oh, well, yeah, Debbie, is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, thank you very much. I noticed that Israelis are going back to Israel to get the shot. Is there, that concerns me because I'm like, well, are there two different kinds of shots? Is there like a really great shot that they're giving to Israel and not so great everywhere else? I'm sorry, I'm a conspiracy theorist. So
I'll give you the answer. Dina, everyone over 16 in Israel can be vaccinated. There's no waiting list.
I know, but Israelis are going back to get vaccinated.
Yes, because they're 41 and they have to wait another 3 months to get vaccinated in the US. It's the Pfizer shot. We've only got the Pfizer shot. We don't have another. We had a few Moderna, but they haven't used them yet. It's the same Pfizer that you get everywhere else. The number of Israelis is not very high. There are people that have come back for the exact reason that you say.
Yeah.
Our airport has been closed for the last 3 weeks, so they couldn't come. Most of them haven't been able to come back.
I wondered about that. How did they get in?
This is last week's topic, but it's the same shot as.
No, I know that. I had time to think about it. And
Muki, is there plans to open the airport in time for every Israelis who want to come back to vote?
So on Sunday, we are supposed to go to the next beat in the next pima. I don't even know how you translate that. The next stage of the relaxation. My youngest son Niv, who's had 5 days of real school since September, should be going back to school a few days a week from next week. Restaurants are opening for anyone who's been vaccinated indoors and for anyone outdoors.
May I say something?
And the airport is supposed to be opening.
Okay.
Airport is supposed to be opening next week.
What I'm concerned
for Israelis.
about.
Does anybody else have a question about the elections and about the presentation that Muki made? Anybody want to ask something about the political parties or the?
Does that mean I'm done?
No, I just wanted to make sure that I gave anybody else a first chance.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyone else have a first question about elections or coalitions? If not, we can let Dina ask one more question. We have another minute or two.
Yeah, it's a doozy. Okay. Are you ready?
Sure.
Yeah, I would like to know, because it concerns me that people are being ostracized if they don't have the vaccine. Once you get the vaccine, you don't have to worry about it because you have the vaccine. Why does everybody else have to be vaccinated if they don't feel comfortable about it, or they want to wait a while to see, well, let's see what happens with this vaccine? I'm very concerned about that.
Well, Dina, I think that that's an American situation that you're describing, not an Israeli situation.
Well, of course it is.
Right,
It's
so with
not-
this,
it is an Israeli situation because you're ostracizing people. People cannot run around freely because they're being ostracized because they haven't had the vaccine.
So I don't know. I'll give you a brief answer, which was the answer that the Minister of Health gave when he was asked a version of this question. 5%. Pfizer vaccine is absolutely fantastic, 95% effective.
Right.
5%.
So why should you guys be afraid
5% of
vaccine?
people, 5% of people who have been vaccinated
Uh-huh.
are still vulnerable. And if they are in a situation with an unvaccinated person, they happen to be in the 5%, they're vulnerable to that person. And so we give people the policy here is to give people the choice. Those who wish, malls, supermarkets, anyone can go into those places. If you're going to sit without a mask in a restaurant, then we're only allowing in vaccinated people. If you're going to go to the theater, we're only allowing in vaccinated people. I'm sure it's an intermediate stage. I don't think it's going to be a stage forever.
It sounds like they're being punished for not going along with the group.
You know what, when you drive without a seatbelt, you get fined, you get punished. There's laws. I don't see it as different to wearing a seatbelt or not wearing a seatbelt. But
Dina,
it's not the focus for now.
Dina, I think that's beyond the scope of the topic of this session. So
thank you for the time.
So if nobody else has a comment or questions about elections, then we can once again say thank you to Muki. We will be back next week.